A janitor in worn blue overalls just asked a paralyzed girl to dance, and the entire ballroom fell silent. What happened next made a billionaire CEO collapse in tears, exposed a shocking betrayal, and revealed a truth so powerful it would change 4 lives forever. This is the story of Ethan Cole, Madeline Carter, and the dance that should never have happened. Stay until the end to discover why this moment shattered everything, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel cast diamonds of light across 500 faces dressed in silk and tailored wool, each one a portrait of American success. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like a jewelry box. But inside this ballroom, the real treasure was measured in charitable donations and business connections. The annual Carter Foundation Gala drew the elite like moths to flame: tech moguls, entertainment executives, political players, all orbiting around one woman, Madeline Carter, the self-made CEO whose software empire had revolutionized data security and made her one of the most powerful women in the country. At 42, Madeline carried herself with the precision of someone who had clawed her way from a Brooklyn tenement to the Forbes billionaire list. Her black evening gown was understated but flawless, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon that revealed the sharp angles of her face. She moved through the crowd like a queen through her court, shaking hands, accepting praise for the foundation's work with children's hospitals. Her smile warm but her eyes constantly calculating, always 3 moves ahead. But tonight, despite the champagne and the orchestra's sweeping melodies, despite the generous checks being written for sick children, Madeline's attention kept drifting to a small table near the edge of the dance floor, partially hidden behind an arrangement of white roses and lilies. There sat Sophie. Madeline's 11-year-old daughter sat motionless in her custom wheelchair, her delicate frame draped in a pale blue dress that Madeline had spent an hour selecting that morning. Sophie's golden hair hung in careful curls around a face that might have been carved from porcelain for all the expression it showed. Her hands lay folded in her lap, unmoving. Her eyes stared at nothing, seeing everything and registering none of it. 14 months. 14 months since the accident that had stolen not just Sophie's ability to walk, but her voice, her smile, her very presence from the world. 14 months of the best neurologists, the most expensive therapists, the most cutting-edge treatments money could buy. 14 months of Madeline holding her daughter's limp hand and begging, pleading for just one word, one flicker of recognition, one sign that Sophie was still in there somewhere. Nothing. The doctors had run every test imaginable. Physically, Sophie's spine showed minimal damage, nothing that should cause complete paralysis. Her brain scans were normal, but she remained locked away, as unreachable as if she'd been sealed in glass. Mrs. Carter, the auction is about to begin. Her assistant, Patricia, materialized at her elbow, tablet in hand. The senator wants to speak with you about the education initiative, and the Chronicle is requesting an interview. Tell them 15 minutes, Madeline said, her eyes still on Sophie. She'd insisted on bringing her daughter tonight, against the advice of Sophie's nurse, against her own better judgment. She told herself it was good for Sophie to be around people, to hear music, to feel part of the world again. But the truth Madeline could barely admit even to herself, was that she couldn't bear to leave Sophie alone anymore. Every moment away felt like abandonment. The accident had taken more than Sophie's mobility. It had taken Julian too, though in a very different way. Madeline's ex-husband stood across the ballroom, holding court with a group of venture capitalists, his sandy hair perfectly styled, his smile easy and confident. Julian Carter looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement, tall, athletic, with the kind of symmetrical features that had first attracted Madeline when they'd met at Harvard Business School 20 years ago. They'd built her company together, or so she'd thought. In reality, Julian had contributed his charm and connections while Madeline did the actual work. When the divorce came through 5 years ago, it had been bitter but clean. $50 million and he'd walked away, started his own consulting firm, moved on. He'd been in the car that night. He and Sophie both. Coming back from his weekend custody visit, Julian had walked away with bruises. Sophie hadn't walked at all. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The auctioneer's voice boomed through the sound system, and the crowd began flowing toward their tables. Madeline moved to Sophie's side, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. The girl didn't react, didn't even blink. "It's okay, sweetheart," Madeline whispered, her throat tight. "It's almost over. We'll go home soon." The auction proceeded with the usual pomp: vacation packages to exclusive resorts, private jet experiences, dinner with celebrities. Madeline bid mechanically on a few items, winning a week at an Italian villa she'd probably never visit. All around her, the wealthy played their games, competing with raised paddles and knowing smiles. She'd been one of them once, had enjoyed this world of excess and influence. Now it all felt hollow, like a stage play she could no longer remember her lines for. She was signing the auction slip when she felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, like a sudden change in air pressure before a storm. The murmuring started somewhere near the entrance, a ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Madeline looked up and felt her entire body go rigid. A man was walking through the ballroom. He didn't belong here. That much was instantly, painfully obvious. While everyone else wore evening gowns and tuxedos, this man wore navy blue work coveralls with "maintenance" embroidered on the breast pocket. His boots were scuffed, his hands showed old calluses, and his dark hair needed cutting. He looked to be in his late 30s, with a lean build and the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard work and harder years. A lanyard with a building ID badge hung around his neck. He was a janitor, a custodian, someone from the hotel staff who had clearly wandered into the wrong event. "Oh my God," someone whispered nearby. "Security is going to have a fit." "What's he doing? Is this some kind of protest?" "Probably drunk. The staff are probably celebrating after working this event." But Madeline watched the man's face as he walked, and he didn't look drunk. He looked focused. His eyes scanned the crowd with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as if he were searching for something specific. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared despite the growing number of people staring at him like he was an exotic animal that had escaped from the zoo. And then his eyes found Sophie. Madeline saw it happen, saw the way his gaze locked onto her daughter's wheelchair, saw something flicker across his face. Recognition? Concern? She couldn't read it, but it made alarm bells clang in her head. The man changed direction, walking with purpose now, straight toward Sophie's table. "Excuse me," Madeline said sharply, stepping forward to intercept him. "You can't be here. This is a private event." He stopped a few feet away, and up close she could see details she'd missed from a distance. His eyes were striking, a deep green that seemed too vibrant for the tired face they occupied. There was a faded scar above his left eyebrow. His hands, though calloused, were steady and clean, and when he looked at her, there was no embarrassment, no apology, just a quiet determination that made her take an involuntary step back. "I know," he said. His voice was low, rough-edged, but not unkind. "I'm sorry for interrupting, but I need to speak with your daughter." The words hit Madeline like ice water. "Absolutely not. Security." She turned, looking for the guards she knew were stationed around the ballroom. "Please," the man said quickly. "Just give me 2 minutes. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not dangerous. He glanced past her at Sophie, and something in his expression made Madeline's protest die in her throat. "I can help her." "What did you say?" Madeline's voice came out as a whisper. Around them a crowd was gathering, drawn by the spectacle. She could hear Julian's voice somewhere behind her, asking what was happening. "Your daughter," the janitor said. "I've seen her here before in the hotel. I work the night shift, clean the therapy center on the 3rd floor. She comes for treatment twice a week, so I've watched her sessions through the observation window." He held up his hands as Madeline's face flushed with anger. "I'm not a stalker. I'm not crazy. But I've noticed something the doctors haven't, something important." "How dare you?" Madeline started, but Julian was suddenly there, shouldering past her, his face red with fury. "What the hell is this? Who are you?" Julian's voice carried across the ballroom, sharp with authority and outrage. "Madeline, why are you talking to this person? He's staff. Security!" He looked around wildly. "Get this man out of here." 2 security guards in black suits were already moving through the crowd, their faces grim and professional. The janitor saw them coming but didn't run. Instead, he took one more step toward Sophie and Madeline found herself frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. "Sophie," the janitor said, and his voice had changed, become softer, gentler. "Sophie, my name is Ethan, Ethan Cole. I know you can hear me, even if you can't respond. I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt, but I also know something else." He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the girl in the wheelchair. "I know you're still in there. I can see it, and I think I know why you can't come out." "That's enough," Julian shouted. "Madeline, do something." But Madeline was watching Sophie, and for the first time in 14 months, she saw something she'd thought was lost forever. Sophie's eyes moved, just a fraction, just the slightest shift of focus, but they moved from their fixed stare into nothing and focused on the janitor's face. It was so small, so subtle that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. But Madeline had spent hundreds of hours staring at her daughter, searching for any sign of awareness, and she saw it clear as day. Sophie was looking at him. "She moved," Madeline heard herself say. "Her eyes. She moved her eyes." "She did nothing of the kind," Julian snapped. "This is absurd. This man is clearly mentally ill or on drugs. Officers, remove him now." The security guards grabbed Ethan's arms, one on each side, and began pulling him backward. He didn't resist, but his eyes stayed locked on Sophie's face. "Sophie, you're not broken," he called out as they dragged him away. "Your body isn't the problem. You're locked inside because you're afraid, but you don't have to be. You're safe now. You're safe." "Get him out of here," Julian roared. Half the ballroom was standing now, phones out, filming the spectacle. This would be all over social media within the hour. "And I want him arrested. Trespassing, harassment." "Wait!" Madeline's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone stopped. Even the security guards paused, looking at her uncertainly. "Wait!" She moved to Sophie's wheelchair, knelt down in her expensive gown, not caring about the fabric pooling on the floor. She took her daughter's hand, cold, limp, lifeless as always, and searched that porcelain face for any trace of what she'd seen moments before. "Sophie?" she whispered. "Baby, can you hear me? Can you hear Mommy?" Nothing. Sophie's eyes had returned to their usual vacant stare, as if that brief moment of focus had never happened. But Madeline had seen it. She knew she had. She stood, turned to face the janitor who was still held between the two guards. Julian was beside her now, his hand on her arm, trying to pull her away. His voice in her ear telling her this was a publicity nightmare, telling her to let security handle it, telling her they needed to leave immediately. But Madeline shook him off. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She hadn't built her empire by ignoring her instincts, and right now, every instinct she had was screaming at her to listen to this man. "What did you see?" she asked Ethan Cole. "In the therapy sessions. What did you notice?" Julian made a sound of disbelief. "Madeline, you cannot be serious. This man is a janitor who's harassing our daughter at a public event. He should be arrested, not interrogated." "Shut up, Julian," Madeline said without looking at him. She kept her eyes on Ethan. "Tell me, what did you see?" Ethan met her gaze, and she saw no deception there, no manipulation, just a deep, bone-tired sadness and something else, a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. "I saw her fingers move during the electrical stimulation therapy," he said. 3 weeks ago. The therapist didn't notice because she was checking the settings on the machine, but I did. It was barely anything, just a tiny curl of her right index finger. But it happened. And then last week, during the hydrotherapy, I saw her foot flex, again, so small that no one caught it. But it was there. "That's impossible," Julian said. "The doctors have tested her extensively. There's been no muscle response at all." "That's because the doctors are looking for physical damage," Ethan replied, his voice gaining strength. "But what if the paralysis isn't physical? What if it's psychological?" Madeline felt her heart stutter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Sophie can move. Her body is capable, but something is stopping her. Something in her mind is keeping her locked down, frozen. I've seen it before. I used to work with patients like her, trauma victims, people whose bodies shut down not because they're broken, but because they're trying to protect themselves from something too terrible to face." The ballroom had gone completely silent. 500 people straining to hear every word. Madeline was aware of cameras still recording, aware that this would be everywhere by morning, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the impossible thing this stranger was suggesting. "You're saying my daughter is choosing this?" Madeline's voice shook. "Choosing to be paralyzed?" "Not choosing. Hiding." Ethan's eyes were gentle now, sad. "Something happened to her, Mrs. Carter. Something beyond the accident itself. Something so frightening that the only way she could survive it was to disappear inside herself, to lock her body down so completely that she couldn't be hurt anymore." "This is insane," Julian said, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. He sounded uncertain now, almost afraid. "Sophie was in a car accident. A terrible accident, but that's all it was. There's nothing—" "Then let me talk to her," Ethan interrupted. "Just talk, nothing more. If I'm wrong, you lose 5 minutes. If I'm right—" He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. If he was right, Sophie might come back. Madeline looked at her daughter, still motionless, still silent, still trapped in whatever prison her mind had built. 14 months of hoping, praying, begging for a miracle. 14 months of watching her little girl slip further and further away. And now this man, this janitor in work coveralls, was offering the first real hope she'd heard since the accident. It was insane. It was impossible. It went against every medical opinion she'd received from the best doctors in the world. But she'd seen Sophie's eyes move. "Julian, take your hand off me," Madeline said quietly. "Security, let him go." "Madeline, no!" Julian started, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen nitrogen. "I said let him go. This is my decision. Sophie is my daughter." "She's my daughter too," Julian protested, but there was something in his eyes now, something that looked almost like panic. "I have custody rights. I won't allow this." "You have her every other weekend, Julian. I have her every other day. And right now, right here, I'm her mother, and I'm making this choice." Madeline turned back to Ethan as the security guards reluctantly released him. 5 minutes. That's all you get. And if this is some kind of scam, if you do anything to hurt her or upset her, I will destroy you. Do you understand? I will use every resource I have to make sure you never work again anywhere in this country. Ethan rubbed his wrists where the guards had held him and nodded. "I understand, and thank you. But Mrs. Carter, I need to tell you something else. This can't happen here, not in front of all these people. Sophie needs to feel safe, and this—" He gestured at the crowd, the cameras, the spectacle they'd created. "This is the opposite of safe." He was right. Madeline could see that. But the rational part of her brain was screaming warnings. This man was a stranger. He could be dangerous. He could be delusional. He could be a predator using her desperation against her. But he'd seen Sophie move. He'd seen what no doctor had noticed. "My car is outside," she said, making the decision before she could second-guess herself. "We'll talk there. Patricia, have the driver pull around front and clear a path. I don't want cameras following us." "Madeline, this is insane," Julian said, moving to block her path. "You're going to take our paralyzed daughter into a vehicle with a complete stranger based on what? His word that he saw her finger move? This is the grief talking. This is desperation making you—" "This is a mother doing whatever it takes to save her child," Madeline said coldly. "Something you've shown remarkably little interest in for the past year. When was the last time you visited Sophie at home, Julian? When was the last time you sat with her for longer than your mandatory visitation hours?" Julian's face flushed dark red, but he had no answer. Madeline pushed past him, moving to Sophie's wheelchair. She unlocked the brakes and began pushing her daughter toward the exit. Ethan walked beside them, quiet now, his face grave. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Madeline could feel their eyes, hear the whispers starting up again, knew this would be dissected and analyzed and gossiped about for months. The powerful Madeline Carter losing her mind at her own charity gala. The janitor who dared to approach the untouchable CEO. The paralyzed daughter caught in the middle. Let them talk. Let them judge. She'd faced worse. They made it to the lobby, then outside into the cool November night. Madeline's Rolls-Royce was already waiting, her driver holding the door open, his face carefully neutral despite whatever chaos he'd heard about over his radio. "Help me get her inside," Madeline said to Ethan. Together they lifted Sophie from the wheelchair. She was so light, too light. had lost weight despite Madeline's efforts to keep her eating, and settled her into the back seat. Madeline climbed in beside her daughter while Ethan folded the wheelchair and handed it to the driver. "Ma'am," the driver said quietly, "is everything all right? Should I call the police?" "Everything's fine, Thomas. Just drive around the block, slowly. We need privacy for a conversation." Thomas nodded and closed the door. A moment later, Ethan opened the opposite door and slid into the seat across from them. The car pulled away from the hotel, and suddenly it was just the four of them: Madeline, Sophie, Ethan, and the weight of 14 months of hope and heartbreak. The interior of the Rolls was quiet, insulated from the city noise outside. Soft leather, polished wood, and the faint scent of Madeline's perfume. Ethan looked profoundly out of place in his work coveralls, his rough hands clasped between his knees. But his eyes remained steady, focused on Sophie, with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "You said you used to work with patients like her," Madeline said, breaking the silence. "What does that mean? Are you a doctor? A therapist?" "I was," Ethan said, "a long time ago. I specialized in neurorehabilitation and trauma recovery. I had a clinic in Boston, worked with accident victims, stroke patients, people with traumatic brain injuries. I developed a therapeutic approach that integrated physical therapy with psychological recovery. It was successful." "Was?" Madeline caught the past tense. "What happened?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. After that, I couldn't do the work anymore, so I left. Walked away from everything, moved here, took a job that didn't require me to care about people because caring hurt too much." He looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. "I've been mopping floors and emptying trash cans for 2 years, and I told myself I was fine with it, that I was done with medicine, done with trying to save people. And then I saw Sophie." Madeline felt something twist in her chest. "What did you see?" "I saw my daughter," Ethan said simply. "My daughter Lila. She's 8 now. After her mother died, Lila stopped talking for 6 months. Selective mutism, the doctors called it. She physically could speak, but she couldn't, because if she talked about normal things, went back to her normal life, it meant accepting that her mother was really gone. So she just stopped." "How did you get her to talk again?" "I didn't push. I didn't force. I just sat with her. Let her know she was safe. Let her know that when she was ready, I would listen. And eventually, slowly, she came back." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Carter, I see the same thing in Sophie that I saw in Lila. That frozen quality. That sense of someone hiding deep inside themselves. And I see those tiny movements that everyone else misses because they're not looking for them. Sophie isn't paralyzed. She's protecting herself." "From what?" Madeline whispered. "From the accident? The doctor said she wouldn't remember it. They said the trauma of the crash probably created amnesia for the event itself." Ethan's eyes shifted to Sophie's face, studying her with a clinical intensity that reminded Madeline he'd once been a doctor. "May I?" He gestured toward Sophie. Madeline hesitated, then nodded. Ethan moved slowly, telegraphing his movements like someone approaching a frightened animal. He knelt on the floor of the car, bringing himself below Sophie's eye level. Non-threatening, safe. "Sophie," he said gently, "I'm going to touch your hand now, just your hand. I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." He reached out and placed his palm under Sophie's right hand, which lay limp in her lap. Then he waited. Madeline watched, barely breathing. The car drove slowly through the dark streets of Manhattan, and for a moment nothing happened. Then Ethan said very quietly, "Sophie, if you can hear me, if you understand what I'm saying, I want you to try something for me. Just try. I know you're scared. I know it feels safer to stay hidden, but I'm asking you to be brave for just 1 second. 1 tiny second. Can you move your finger? Any finger, just the smallest movement. No one needs to see it but me. It can be our secret." Silence. The hum of the engine. The distant sound of traffic. Madeline felt tears building behind her eyes, felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over her shoulders. It had been foolish to hope, foolish to believe this stranger with his sad story and his impossible theories. And then she saw it. Sophie's index finger moved. Not much. Maybe a millimeter, maybe less. But it moved. It curled slightly against Ethan's palm, then relaxed. Madeline made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She moved. Oh God, she moved. Ethan's face remained calm, professional, but she could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Yes, she did. Sophie, that was perfect. You did so well. You're so brave. He looked up at Madeline. She's in there. She can hear us. She can respond. The paralysis is functional, not structural. I don't understand, Madeline said, wiping at her eyes. Why would she do this to herself? Why would she choose to be paralyzed? She's not choosing it consciously. It's a protective mechanism. Her brain has essentially shut down her voluntary motor control to keep her safe from something. And based on what I've observed, I think that something happened not during the accident, but after. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. After? Madeline repeated. What do you mean after? I think Sophie witnessed or experienced something traumatic in the immediate aftermath of the crash. Something that scared her so badly that her mind decided the only way to survive was to disappear completely, to become so still, so quiet, that whatever threat she perceived couldn't find her. Madeline felt cold suddenly, despite the car's heating. But that doesn't make sense. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Julian was with her the whole time. He stayed with her until the ambulance came. He told me. He said he held her, talked to her, kept her calm until help arrived. Ethan said nothing. He just looked at her, his expression careful, neutral. And in that neutrality, Madeline felt something dark and terrible beginning to take shape. What are you suggesting? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not suggesting anything, Ethan said. I'm only telling you what I've observed medically. Sophie's paralysis is psychological trauma presenting as physical disability, and the trigger for that trauma occurred at the scene of the accident. What exactly happened there? That's something only Sophie knows, and until she feels safe enough to tell us, she'll stay locked inside herself. The car had completed its circuit and was pulling back up to the hotel. Through the tinted windows, Madeline could see the crowd still gathered outside, the flash of cameras, the chaos they'd left behind. She looked at her daughter, motionless again, that brief spark of movement already vanished, and felt the world tilting beneath her. For 14 months, she'd been focused on the physical, on doctors and treatments and therapy, on fixing Sophie's broken body. She'd never considered that Sophie's body wasn't broken at all, that the real damage was somewhere much harder to reach, much harder to heal. I need your help, Madeline heard herself say. I need you to work with her, to try to bring her back. Mrs. Carter, I'll pay you anything. Name your price. I don't care what it costs. I just need my daughter back. She turned to face him fully, and she could feel the desperation leaking into her voice, could feel her carefully maintained CEO composure cracking. Please. You're the first person who's given me any hope in over a year. You're the first person who's seen her really see something. Please don't walk away now. Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly exhausted. It's not about money. Mrs. Carter, I left medicine for a reason. I don't practice anymore. I can't. What I did tonight, approaching Sophie, talking to you, that was probably the most reckless thing I've done in 3 years. I could lose my job. I could be arrested for harassment, and I'm not even sure I can help her. I just saw something that bothered me enough that I couldn't stay silent. But you can help her. You got her to move. No one else has been able to do that. One finger movement isn't a cure. It's barely a beginning. What Sophie needs is intensive therapy, probably months of it, with someone who specializes in trauma. I can give you names, recommend excellent psychiatrists who work with children. I've already seen them, Madeline cut him off. I've taken Sophie to every specialist in the country. They all say the same thing. Give it time, wait for the healing process, hope for gradual improvement. But it's been 14 months and she's only gotten worse. She's fading away. I can feel it. She's slipping further inside herself every day, and I don't know how to reach her. The car stopped. Thomas opened Madeline's door, and the noise of the outside world rushed in. Sirens, voices, the click of cameras. Madeline ignored it all, keeping her eyes locked on Ethan Cole. I'm not asking you to commit to anything long-term, she said. Just give me a week. Come to my house. Spend time with Sophie. See if you can make more progress. If after a week you don't think you can help her, I'll accept that. I'll let you go. But if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that you can bring my daughter back, I have to try. We have to try." Ethan looked at Sophie, then back at Madeline. She could see the war playing out across his face. The doctor who wanted to heal battling with the broken man who'd walked away from healing. The hope fighting with the fear of failure, of pain, of caring again. "1 week," he finally said. "But I have conditions. First, this stays private. No publicity, no media. What happened tonight is already going to be a circus, but I won't have Sophie's recovery turned into a spectacle. Second, I work alone. I don't need other doctors questioning my methods or interfering. And third," he paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "My daughter Lila. She comes with me. I'm a single father. I don't have childcare, and I won't leave her alone. If that's a problem—" "It's not a problem," Madeline said quickly. "Bring her. Sophie could use a friend. Even if she can't respond yet," she thought. "Even if she can't play or talk or laugh. Having another child around might help. Might remind Sophie of what it means to be a kid." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we have an agreement. I'll need to give notice at my job, arrange my schedule. I can start Monday. That gives you 2 days to prepare Sophie, explain to her that I'll be coming, that we're going to try something new." "Monday," Madeline agreed. "I'll send a car for you. What's your address?" He told her, and she committed it to memory. Then he climbed out of the rolls, stood on the curb in his work coveralls, looking small and out of place among the evening gowns and tuxedos still spilling out of the hotel. Before he walked away, he leaned back down to speak through the open door. "Mrs. Carter, there's one more thing you should know. If I'm right about Sophie, if her paralysis really is psychological trauma, then helping her recover means she'll have to face whatever scared her. She'll have to remember. And sometimes the truth we're hiding from is more painful than the symptoms we create to avoid it. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to learn something you might not want to know?" Madeline looked at Sophie, at her beautiful, broken, silent daughter, and felt a chill run down her spine. But she nodded. "Whatever it takes. I just want her back." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Madeline watched him go, then pulled Sophie close, wrapping her arms around her daughter's unresponsive body. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered into Sophie's golden hair. "I found someone who can help you, someone who sees you. It's going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she felt the weight of Ethan's warning settling over her like a shroud. Whatever truth Sophie was hiding from, whatever had happened at that accident scene that was so terrible it had driven her to lock herself away completely, Madeline was about to uncover it. And some part of her, some deep instinct she couldn't quite name, whispered that once she knew the truth, nothing would ever be okay again. The rolls pulled away from the hotel, carrying them through the glittering city toward home. Behind them, the gala continued. The charity auction resumed. The wealthy and powerful returned to their champagne and their causes. But Madeline Carter barely noticed. Her mind was already racing forward, already preparing for Monday, for Ethan Cole and his daughter, for whatever journey they were about to begin. In her arms, Sophie remained still and silent, locked in her invisible prison. But Madeline had seen her move, had seen that tiny curl of her finger, that miraculous sign of life. It was the first miracle she'd witnessed in 14 months. She prayed desperately it wouldn't be the last. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Julian's panicked expression when Ethan had started talking about Sophie's trauma kept replaying itself. The way he'd tried so hard to get the janitor removed, the way he'd dismissed every word Ethan said, the way he'd looked almost frightened. "What are you hiding, Julian?" Madeline thought, staring out at the passing city lights. "What happened that night that I don't know about?" But she pushed the thought away. Julian was Sophie's father. Whatever his faults as a husband and ex-husband, he loved his daughter. He would never do anything to hurt her. Would he? The question followed her all the way home, an unwelcome ghost she couldn't shake. And in the darkness of the car, Sophie's eyes flickered once more. Just for a second, just long enough for Madeline to wonder if her daughter had heard her thoughts. If Sophie knew exactly what secrets her mother was about to uncover. and if that terrified her even more than the silence. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation that left Madeline feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unable to see the bottom. Saturday morning found her in Sophie's room at 7 a.m., pulling back the heavy curtains to let autumn sunlight spill across the hardwood floors. Sophie sat propped in her specialized bed, positioned exactly as the night nurse had left her, her eyes open but seeing nothing, her body a beautiful statue carved from flesh instead of marble. "Good morning, sweetheart," Madeline said, forcing brightness into her voice as she did every morning, pretending this was normal, pretending her heart wasn't breaking with every word that went unanswered. "We have a big week ahead of us. Someone new is coming to help you. His name is Ethan, and he has a daughter named Lila who's going to visit too. Won't that be nice?" Sophie's expression didn't change. Madeline hadn't expected it to, but some foolish part of her kept hoping that maybe today would be different, that maybe the finger movement from Friday night had been the beginning of something, a crack in the wall that kept her daughter prisoner. She went through the morning routine with mechanical efficiency born of 14 months of practice. Helping Sophie to the bathroom, supporting her weight as the girl's legs dragged uselessly. Washing her face with a warm cloth, brushing her teeth, combing through those golden curls that had once bounced with life and laughter. Getting her dressed in soft cotton clothes that were easy to manage, easy to change when accidents happened because Sophie couldn't communicate her needs. Every task was a reminder of what they'd lost. Sophie had been such a vibrant child before the accident. Curious, talkative, always asking questions about everything. She'd wanted to be a veterinarian, had filled notebooks with drawings of animals she wanted to help someday. She'd taken dance lessons and piano lessons, and had been learning French because she dreamed of visiting Paris. She'd had friends, plans, a future stretched out before her like a golden road. Now she had nothing but silence and stillness, and a mother who was slowly drowning in helplessness. Madeline was lifting Sophie into her wheelchair when her phone buzzed. Julian's name lit up the screen, and she felt her jaw tighten automatically. She'd been avoiding his calls since Friday night, had ignored the 17 messages he'd left demanding to know what she was thinking, insisting they needed to talk about the janitor situation, threatening to call his lawyer if she went through with any kind of unsupervised treatment. She let this call go to voicemail too. By noon, Sophie was settled in the sunroom, positioned by the windows overlooking the garden where fall leaves drifted down like copper snow. Madeline had spent a fortune on this house in Westchester, a modern fortress of glass and stone set on 5 private acres. She'd bought it after the divorce, wanting space between herself and Julian, wanting a sanctuary where she could focus on building her company and raising Sophie. Now it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautiful cage they were both trapped inside. "Mrs. Carter?" Patricia appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, her expression carefully neutral. "The publicity team is asking for a statement about Friday night. TMZ is running a story, and Twitter is calling you everything from a grieving mother to someone having a public breakdown. They want to know how you'd like to respond." Madeline didn't look away from Sophie. "Tell them no comment. Tell them to respect our privacy during this difficult time. The usual corporate speak. They're also asking if you want to pursue charges against Mr. Cole. Apparently Julian's attorney has already filed a restraining order request." Now Madeline did turn, her eyes sharp. "He did what?" "Filed for an emergency restraining order claiming Mr. Cole poses a threat to Sophie's safety and well-being. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Julian's lawyer is arguing that Mr. Cole is an unstable individual who engaged in targeted harassment of a vulnerable child." Of course he did. Madeline felt fury rising hot in her chest. This was so typical of Julian, trying to control the situation, trying to make decisions about Sophie's care without consulting her. They might be divorced, but he still acted like he had authority over every aspect of their daughter's life. "Contact my attorney. I want that restraining order blocked. I want it clear on the record that I invited Mr. Cole to work with Sophie, that this is my decision as her primary custodial parent, and that Julian has no standing to interfere." Patricia nodded, making notes. "There's something else. A Detective Morrison from the NYPD called. He wants to speak with you about the accident. Says it's routine follow-up, but he was quite insistent about scheduling a meeting." Madeline felt something cold slither down her spine. The accident was over a year ago. Why would they be following up now? "He didn't say, but he mentioned he'd like to speak with you before Monday if possible." before Monday, before Ethan started working with Sophie. Madeline didn't believe in coincidences, especially not coincidences that involved Julian's sudden legal maneuvering and police detectives calling after 14 months of silence. Schedule it for tomorrow, here at the house. And Patricia, I want our head of security present for that conversation. Something doesn't feel right. After Patricia left, Madeline sat beside Sophie, taking her daughter's limp hand in her own. The sunlight caught the delicate bones of Sophie's wrist, the translucent quality of her skin. She'd always been a small child, but now she looked almost ethereal, like she was slowly fading from the world. "What happened, baby?" Madeline whispered. "What are you so afraid of? What did you see that scared you so badly?" Sophie stared at nothing, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of breathing, alive but not living. Madeline's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Carter, this is Ethan Cole." His voice was rough, hesitant. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the hotel employee directory. I wanted to check in, see how Sophie was doing after Friday night." Madeline felt an unexpected wave of relief at hearing his voice. "She's the same, no change since the car. But I'm glad you called. We need to talk before Monday. Julian is trying to get a restraining order against you. He's claiming you're dangerous." There was a long pause. "I was afraid something like this might happen. Mrs. Carter, if this is going to cause legal problems for you, I can step back. I don't want to make your situation worse." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No, you're not stepping back. Julian doesn't get to make this decision, but I need you to be prepared for what you're walking into. This isn't just about treating Sophie anymore. There are going to be lawyers involved, possibly police. Julian is going to fight this." "Why?" Ethan asked quietly. Why would her father try to prevent treatment that might help her? It was the same question that had been haunting Madeline since Friday night. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." They talked for a few more minutes, Ethan explaining his planned approach, the gentle techniques he'd used with trauma patients, the importance of creating a safe environment where Sophie could begin to feel secure enough to emerge from her protective shell. Madeline listened, taking notes, asking questions, feeling the first real stirrings of hope she'd experienced in over a year. When they hung up, she looked at Sophie and made a decision. "We're going to get through this, baby," she said. "Whatever it takes. Whatever secrets we have to uncover. I'm going to bring you back." Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Madeline's mood. Detective Morrison showed up at 10 a.m. sharp, a stocky man in his 50s with tired eyes and a rumpled suit that had seen better days. Madeline's head of security, Marcus, was already waiting in her study when she showed the detective in. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for seeing me," Morrison said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. He pulled out a worn notebook and a pen that looked like he'd been chewing on it. "I know this is probably the last thing you want to deal with on a Sunday morning." "You said this was about the accident," Madeline said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'm not sure what more I can tell you that I haven't already told the police 14 months ago." "I understand, and I apologize for bringing this up again, but some new information has come to light, and I need to clarify a few details." Morrison flipped through his notebook. "Can you walk me through what you remember about that night, where you were, what you were doing when you got the call about the accident?" Madeline had told this story so many times it had taken on the quality of a rehearsed script. "I was in California, meeting with investors. It was around 9 p.m. Pacific time when Julian called. He was frantic, said that there'd been an accident, that they were taking Sophie to Mount Sinai. I chartered a plane immediately and flew back. By the time I arrived at the hospital, Sophie was already in surgery." "And your ex-husband, Mr. Julian Carter, he was driving the vehicle?" "Yes, it was his custody weekend. They were coming back from his house in Connecticut." Morrison made a note. "According to the accident report, the crash occurred on the Merritt Parkway around midnight. Mr. Carter told responding officers that he fell asleep at the wheel, drifted into the shoulder, and struck a tree. Is that your understanding?" "That's what he told me, yes." Madeline felt her pulse quickening. "Why are you asking me this now? What new information?" Morrison looked up from his notebook, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Carter, we received an anonymous tip 3 weeks ago, suggesting that the accident might not have been exactly as reported. The tipster claimed there were inconsistencies in Mr. Carter's statement that were never properly investigated. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his eyes sharp. What kind of inconsistencies? The timing, for one thing. According to phone records, Mr. Carter made several calls after the accident but before calling 911. The first was to his financial advisor, which struck us as odd. The second was to his attorney. Only the third call was to emergency services, and by that time nearly 12 minutes had passed since the collision. Madeline felt like she couldn't breathe. 12 minutes? Julian told me he called for help immediately. He eventually did call for help, but there's a gap we can't account for. We've been trying to speak with Mr. Carter about this, but his attorney keeps blocking us, citing client privilege and claiming harassment. Morrison leaned back. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about your ex-husband's behavior since the accident? Anything that made you uncomfortable or suspicious? Madeline thought about Friday night, about Julian's panic when Ethan started talking about Sophie's trauma, about the restraining order he'd filed so quickly, about the way he barely visited Sophie anymore, always making excuses, always too busy. He's been distant, she said slowly, with Sophie. Before the accident, he was obsessed with her, fought me for custody, wanted her every possible moment. But after the accident, it's like he can't stand to be around her. He does the minimum required visitation and nothing more. Morrison nodded like this confirmed something. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be frank with you. We have reason to believe that something happened at that accident scene, something that wasn't included in the original report. We don't know what yet. But the fact that your daughter has been unable to speak or communicate since that night, combined with the timing inconsistencies and your ex-husband's evasive behavior, suggests that there might be more to this story. What are you saying? Madeline's voice came out as a whisper. Are you saying Julian did something to Sophie? I'm saying we need to investigate further, and I'm saying that if your daughter does begin to recover, if she does start to remember what happened that night, we'd very much like to speak with her. Morrison stood, tucking his notebook away. In the meantime, Mrs. Carter, I'd advise you to be careful. If your ex-husband is involved in something criminal, and if he thinks Sophie might remember and expose him, he may become dangerous. After Morrison left, Madeline sat in her study for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind racing. Marcus waited silently, his presence steady and reassuring. Do you think it's true? She finally asked. Do you think Julian hurt her? I think, Marcus said carefully, that you need to proceed with extreme caution. If Detective Morrison's suspicions are correct, then bringing Sophie back, helping her remember, could put her in danger. Julian has resources. He has connections. If he's desperate enough to hide something, then I need to protect her. Madeline stood, decision crystallizing. Marcus, I want security upgraded. I want cameras on every entrance, guards posted 24/7. I want to know every person who comes within 100 feet of this property. And I want someone watching Julian. I want to know where he goes, who he meets with, everything. Consider it done. That night, Madeline couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that 12-minute gap, 12 minutes between the crash and the call for help. What had Julian been doing? Who had he been calling? And what had Sophie witnessed that was so terrible her mind had shut down completely to escape it? She went to Sophie's room at 2 a.m., found her daughter sleeping restlessly, small whimpers escaping her lips. Madeline climbed into the bed beside her, gathering Sophie into her arms the way she had when Sophie was a baby, when the world was simple and safe and full of promise. I'm going to protect you, Madeline whispered into the darkness. Whatever your father did, whatever he's hiding, I'm going to keep you safe. I promise. Sophie's whimpers quieted, and for a moment Madeline could almost believe her daughter had heard her, had taken comfort from her presence. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Madeline had been up since 5, too anxious to sleep, pacing through the house and second-guessing every decision. At 8 a.m., her attorney called to confirm that Julian's restraining order had been denied, but warned that he would likely appeal. At 8:30, Patricia forwarded 17 emails from board members concerned about the publicity from Friday night, worried about how the incident might affect the company's image. Madeline ignored them all. Let the board worry about optics. Let the media speculate and gossip. None of it mattered compared to Sophie. At 9 a.m., the security gate buzzed. Marcus's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Cole is here." "Send him through." Madeline positioned herself in the foyer, trying to project calm confidence even though her heart was hammering. Through the window, she watched a battered Honda Civic navigate the long driveway, looking absurdly out of place among the manicured lawns and modern architecture. The car stopped near the front entrance, and Ethan climbed out, followed by a small figure that made Madeline's breath catch. Lila Cole was tiny, all big brown eyes and dark curls pulled into a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a purple sweater with a unicorn on it, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. She looked terrified, clinging to her father's hand as they approached the house. Madeline opened the door before they could knock. "Ethan, thank you for coming, and you must be Lila." The little girl pressed herself against her father's leg, saying nothing. Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder. "She's shy with new people. It takes her a while to warm up. Lila, remember what we talked about? We're here to help Sophie. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I need you to be brave, okay?" Lila nodded, her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightening. "Please, come in." Madeline stepped back, holding the door wide. "Sophie's in the sunroom. I thought we could start there since it's her favorite space." She led them through the house, acutely aware of how it must look to them. The soaring ceilings, the expensive art on the walls, the gleaming floors. Ethan took it all in with an expression she couldn't read, while Lila's eyes grew wider with each room they passed through. Sophie sat in her wheelchair by the windows, exactly where the nurse had positioned her an hour earlier. She wore a soft yellow dress that brought out the gold in her hair, and Madeline had spent 20 minutes on her makeup, trying to make her look less pale, less sick. The effect was heartbreaking. Sophie looked like a doll, beautiful and lifeless. "Sophie," Madeline said gently, moving to her daughter's side. "The people I told you about are here. This is Ethan, and this is his daughter Lila. They're going to spend some time with us." Ethan approached slowly, that same careful movement she'd noticed in the car, like he was dealing with something fragile and precious. But his attention wasn't on Sophie. He was watching Lila. "Lila, honey, can you come here?" He held out his hand to his daughter. "I want you to meet Sophie. She's 11, a little older than you. She can't talk right now, but that doesn't mean she can't hear us or understand us. Remember when you couldn't talk after Mommy died? You were still you inside, you just couldn't find the words. Sophie's like that." Lila looked up at her father with those huge brown eyes, then slowly, carefully, approached Sophie's wheelchair. She was so small, so delicate, and the contrast between her cautious movement and Sophie's complete stillness was almost too much to bear. "Hi," Lila whispered, so quiet Madeline almost didn't hear it. "I'm Lila. I like your dress. Yellow is my favorite color." Nothing. Sophie stared at the window, unmoving. But then Lila did something unexpected. She held out her stuffed rabbit, placing it carefully in Sophie's lap. "This is Mr. Hoppy. He's been with me since I was a baby. Daddy says he's magic because he keeps away bad dreams. Maybe he can help you too." Madeline felt tears burning behind her eyes. This tiny child, offering her most treasured possession to a stranger who couldn't even acknowledge the gift. It was the purest act of kindness she'd seen in months. Ethan knelt beside both girls, bringing himself to their level. "That was very brave, Lila. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Hoppy." He turned his attention to Sophie, his voice taking on that gentle, clinical quality she'd heard in the car. "Sophie, I know you can hear me. I know you're scared. But I want you to know something important. You're safe here. Whatever happened that scared you so badly, it's over. It can't hurt you anymore. And you don't have to stay hidden forever. Whenever you're ready to come out, we'll be here waiting." He reached into his bag and pulled out a sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. "I'm going to leave these here for you. You don't have to use them if you don't want to. But if you ever feel like drawing, like showing us what's inside your head, these are here, okay?" He placed them on the table beside Sophie's wheelchair, then stood and stepped back, giving her space. Madeline watched all of this with a growing sense of disbelief. This was his treatment? Talking to her daughter and leaving art supplies? She'd been expecting some kind of revolutionary therapy, some specialized technique that would unlock Sophie's prison. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan turned to her. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" They moved to the kitchen, leaving Lila sitting cross-legged on the floor near Sophie's wheelchair, talking quietly to Mr. Hoppy about all the adventures they'd had together. Madeline could hear the little girl's voice through the doorway, a soft musical chatter that filled the silence Sophie left behind. "I know this seems like nothing," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. "You were probably expecting something more dramatic. But Mrs. Carter, Sophie's recovery isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to be slow, incremental. The first step is just creating an environment where she feels safe enough to start lowering her defenses." "How long?" Madeline asked. "How long before we see real progress?" "I don't know. Every patient is different. With Lila, it took 6 months before she spoke her first word after her mother died. Some of my patients in Boston took longer. Some took less time." He met her eyes. "What I can tell you is that forcing it will only make things worse. Sophie has to choose to come back. We can encourage her, support her, show her it's safe. But ultimately, the decision is hers." Madeline looked through the doorway at her daughter. "The police came to see me yesterday. They think Julian did something at the accident scene, something that traumatized Sophie." She watched Ethan's expression carefully, saw the flicker of confirmation there. "I suspected as much. Sophie's specific presentation, the way she shuts down completely, the way she seems almost frozen in fear, it's consistent with witnessing something violating, something that shattered her sense of safety so completely that her only option was to disappear." What could he have done? Julian's not violent. He's narcissistic, self-centered, but he's not cruel. He loved Sophie. "Trauma isn't always about physical violence," Ethan said quietly. "Sometimes it's about betrayal, about seeing someone you trust do something unthinkable. Children are incredibly perceptive. They notice things adults think they can hide." Before Madeline could respond, there was a sound from the sunroom, a small, soft sound that made them both freeze. It was humming. Lila was humming a tune, something simple and sweet, and she was swaying slightly as she sat on the floor, making Mr. Hoppy dance to the melody. And Sophie's head had turned, just slightly, just enough to see Lila instead of the window. Madeline grabbed Ethan's arm. "Look," she breathed. "She's watching." They stood in the kitchen doorway, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, as Sophie's eyes tracked Lila's movements. It was such a small thing, but after 14 months of absolute stillness, it was everything. Ethan's hand covered Madeline, steadying her. "Don't react. Don't make a big deal. Just let it happen naturally." So they watched in silence as Lila continued her innocent play, completely unaware that she was performing a miracle. She picked up one of the colored pencils from the table, examined it critically, then began drawing on the sketch pad, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "I'm going to draw you and Mr. Hoppy," she announced to Sophie. "You can watch if you want. I'm not very good at drawing, but Daddy says what matters is trying." Sophie's eyes remained fixed on Lila's face, on the movement of her small hands across the paper. And then, so slowly Madeline almost thought she was imagining it, Sophie's fingers began to move. Not much, just a slight curl, a tiny flexing of muscles that hadn't responded in over a year. She was reaching for the pencils. Ethan's hand tightened on Madeline's, a silent warning not to interfere. They watched as Sophie's hand crept across the arm of her wheelchair, trembling with effort, moving with agonizing slowness toward the colored pencils. It took minutes that felt like hours. Lila kept drawing, chattering away, apparently not noticing the monumental struggle happening beside her. Finally, Sophie's fingers brushed against a red pencil. They closed around it, clumsy and uncertain, like a baby learning to grasp for the first time. She lifted it, the movement jerky and uncoordinated, and slowly, painfully, brought it to the sketchpad. The pencil touched paper. Sophie began to draw. Madeline made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, pressing her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out loud. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her, and together they watched as Sophie created her first communication in 14 months. At first, the marks were just scratches, random lines that showed how much control she'd lost over her fine motor skills. But gradually, a shape began to emerge. Angular, harsh, dark red, streaking across the white paper. It was a car. Broken and twisted, the windshield shattered into spiderweb patterns. And beside the car, a stick figure standing, not helping, not calling for aid, just standing and holding something. Sophie's hand shook as she drew, and the red pencil pressed so hard into the paper it began to tear. The figure was reaching into the wrecked car, taking something, and in the corner of the drawing, barely visible, was a smaller figure, a child, watching. Then Sophie's hand stopped. The pencil fell from her fingers and rolled onto the floor. Her eyes went blank again, retreating back into that safe nowhere place. But she'd left behind a message, a piece of evidence, a window into the nightmare that had stolen her from the world. Madeline moved forward on shaking legs, picking up the drawing with trembling hands. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Oh, God. What did you see, baby?" Ethan was beside her, examining the sketch with clinical focus. She remembers. She was conscious at the scene. She saw something, someone taking something from the car. Someone who should have been helping her but wasn't. He looked at Madeline, his expression grim. "We need to document this. Photograph it. Preserve it. If Julian did something criminal that night, this could be evidence." "Julian," Madeline repeated, staring at the stick figure in the drawing. The proportions were rough, childlike, but the intent was clear. This was an adult male. This was someone Sophie knew, someone she'd trusted. He took something. That's why he made those calls before 911. He was stealing something from the wreck. Do you know what it could have been? Madeline's mind raced through possibilities. Julian had been in the car with Sophie, coming back from Connecticut, from his house where he kept his office, his files. "Documents," she said suddenly. He had his home office there, financial records, business papers. He's a financial consultant. He handles money for wealthy clients. What if he had something in the car he wasn't supposed to have? Something incriminating? You think he let his daughter lie there in pain, possibly dying, so he could destroy evidence? Madeline looked at Sophie, at her daughter who had retreated back into silence, and felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. "I think," she said slowly, "that I don't know my ex-husband as well as I thought I did. And I think we need to find out exactly what he was hiding." The photograph of Sophie's drawing sat on Madeline's desk like an accusation, the harsh red lines seeming to pulse with their own dark energy even in the soft lamplight of her study. It was nearly midnight, and she'd been staring at it for hours, trying to make sense of what her daughter had shown them, trying to reconcile the man she'd married with the monster that drawing suggested. Ethan sat across from her, nursing his third cup of coffee, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes alert. They'd sent the girls to bed hours ago after Sophie had retreated fully back into her silence, her brief emergence apparently costing her everything she had. Lila had fallen asleep on the guest room bed clutching Mr. Hoppy, while Sophie lay in her own room with the night nurse watching over her, and Madeline had convinced Ethan to stay, to help her figure out what to do with this terrible new knowledge. "Walk me through it again," she said, her voice hoarse from talking. "Everything you know about this kind of trauma response." Ethan rubbed his eyes, the gesture making him look older than his years. In cases of severe psychological trauma, especially in children, the mind creates defense mechanisms to protect itself from memories too painful to process. What makes Sophie's case unusual is the completeness of her shutdown. She's not just avoiding the memory or suppressing it, she's locked herself away so thoroughly that she can't even perform basic voluntary functions. But she drew today. She communicated. She did, which tells me two things. First, that she's ready to start trying to come back, at least in small ways. Not just neglect, not just bad judgment, but active harm. Taking something from that car was more important to this person than getting help for Sophie. That's the kind of thing that shatters a child's entire understanding of the world. Madeline felt sick. She'd known Julian was selfish, had known he prioritized his own needs above others, but this was something else entirely. This was sociopathy. What kind of documents could be worth that? Worth letting your own child suffer? That's what we need to find out. But Madeline, you need to understand something. If Julian realizes Sophie is starting to remember, starting to communicate, he's going to see her as a threat. If those documents implicate him in something criminal, your daughter becomes a witness, a liability. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Madeline thought about Detective Morrison's warning, about being careful, about Julian potentially being dangerous. She thought about the restraining order he'd filed so quickly, his desperate attempts to keep Ethan away from Sophie. Had that been about protecting his daughter or protecting himself? "I need to know what he took," she said, standing abruptly. "I need to understand what we're dealing with. Julian keeps files, records of all his consulting work. When we divorced, I got copies of everything for the financial settlement. They're in storage, but I can access them." "At midnight?" "I own the storage facility, one of my company's early investments." She was already moving toward the door, grabbing her coat. "Marcus can get us in. We can review the files tonight, look for anything that might explain what Julian was hiding." Ethan stood more slowly. "You realize this could be considered improper if it ever goes to court, going through his files without a warrant. They're my files, from our divorce. Perfectly legal." Madeline met his eyes. "I'm not going to sit here wondering what my ex-husband values more than our daughter's life. I need to know. I need to understand what we're up against." They drove through the empty streets of Westchester in Madeline's Mercedes, Marcus following in a second vehicle. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, a climate-controlled warehouse that housed documents for dozens of local businesses. Marcus used his security clearance to override the gate, and within minutes they were walking down fluorescent-lit corridors past rows of locked units. Madeline's unit was in the back, a 10 by 20 space stuffed with boxes from her divorce. She'd meant to go through them eventually, sort out what was worth keeping and what could be destroyed, but she'd never found the time or the emotional energy to face the physical remains of her failed marriage. Now she stood in front of the unit, key in hand, feeling like she was about to open Pandora's box. The lock clicked. Lock. The door rolled up with a metallic shriek that echoed down the empty corridor. Inside, boxes were stacked floor to ceiling, each labeled in Patricia's precise handwriting. Financial records, tax documents, property deeds, business contracts, 20 years of combined life reduced to cardboard and paper. "Where do we start?" Ethan asked, surveying the overwhelming collection. "Business files, Julian's consulting work." Madeline began pulling boxes, reading labels. "He handled investments for high-net-worth clients, private wealth management, tax optimization, offshore accounts. It was all supposedly legal, but he was always secretive about the details. Client confidentiality, he'd say, even with me." They worked in silence, opening boxes and spreading documents across the concrete floor. Marcus stood guard at the door, his presence a reminder that they were doing something that, if not illegal, was certainly crossing lines. Madeline tried not to think about what Julian would do if he found out. Tried not to imagine his rage, his threats, his inevitable legal retaliation. An hour passed, then 2. The documents were dense, technical, full of financial jargon and complex transactions that made Madeline's head spin. Ethan, surprisingly, seemed to understand more than she did. "My wife was a forensic accountant," he explained when she commented on it. "She used to walk me through her cases over dinner. I picked up enough to be dangerous." He held up a particularly thick folder. "Madeline, look at this. These are transactions from 18 months ago. Large transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. The names on the accounts are shell corporations, but the originating funds came from someone called Donovan Properties, LLC. Madeline felt her blood run cold. "James Donovan. He's a real estate developer. Very wealthy, very connected. He's been under federal investigation for money laundering for the past 2 years. And your ex-husband was helping him move money offshore." Ethan's voice was grim. "That's not tax optimization. That's active participation in criminal activity. If these documents were in Julian's car the night of the accident, if they could connect him to Donovan's money laundering operation, he'd be looking at serious federal prison time. So he took them. He let Sophie lie there in pain, possibly dying, while he searched through the wreckage and took files that could incriminate him." Madeline's hands shook as she reached for the folder. And Sophie saw him do it, saw her father choose his freedom over her life. That would explain the depth of her trauma, the completeness of her shutdown. Ethan sat back on his heels, his face pale in the harsh fluorescent light. She didn't just witness an accident. She witnessed a betrayal so profound it destroyed her ability to trust anyone, including her own perceptions. Her mind is trying to protect her from the knowledge that her father is not who she thought he was. Madeline thought about Sophie's drawing, about that stick figure taking something from the car while a child watched. How long had Sophie been conscious after the crash? How long had she lain there, broken and scared, watching Julian prioritize documents over her safety? Minutes? An hour? Long enough to understand that her father was a monster wearing a familiar face. "We need to take these to the police," she said. "To Detective Morrison. This is evidence." Evidence we obtained without a warrant. A defense attorney would shred it. "I don't care. Morrison needs to know what we're dealing with. He needs to understand what Julian is capable of." Madeline started gathering the most damning documents, shoving them into her briefcase. If Julian realizes Sophie is starting to remember, if he thinks she might be able to testify against him, he'll do whatever it takes to silence her. I can't let that happen. I won't. They were loading the last of the documents into the car when Marcus's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, then his face changed. "Mrs. Carter, we have a problem. The security system at your house just triggered an alert. Someone tried to access the property through the service entrance." Madeline felt her heart stop. Sophie. They drove back at speeds that would have gotten them arrested on any night when the roads weren't empty. Marcus coordinated with the security team through his phone, his voice clipped and professional. But Madeline could hear the tension underneath. Someone had tried to breach the estate. The alarms had scared them off, but they'd been there. At her house. Near her daughter. The estate was lit up like a prison when they arrived, every security light blazing, 3 patrol cars from the private security company parked at various points along the perimeter. Madeline barely waited for the car to stop before she was running toward the house, Ethan close behind her. The head of the security team met her at the door, a former Secret Service agent named Sarah, who Madeline had hired specifically because she was the best in the business. "Mrs. Carter, everyone inside is safe. Your daughter is secure in her room with the nurse. Lila is still sleeping in the guest room. No one breached the actual house." "What happened?" Madeline demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. Someone approached the service entrance at approximately 2:15 a.m. They were dressed in dark clothing, face covered. They attempted to bypass the keypad lock using what looked like a bypass device. The alarm triggered, lights came on, and they fled on foot toward the tree line. "We've got officers searching the grounds now." "Did you get footage?" "Partial. The individual knew where our cameras were positioned and avoided most of them. What we did capture shows someone approximately 6 feet tall, male build, athletic. That's all we can determine." 6 feet tall, male, athletic. The description fit Julian perfectly, but it also fit thousands of other men. Madeline forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. Could it have been a random attempted burglary? Sarah's expression was skeptical. "The timing is suspicious. This is a gated community with regular patrols. Random burglars don't generally target estates with visible security systems. And the fact that they approached the service entrance, which is the least visible point of access, suggests prior knowledge of the property layout, meaning someone who'd been here before, someone who knew the house." Madeline looked at Marcus, saw her own thoughts reflected in his face. "Julian has been here dozens of times for custody pickups. He knows the layout." "We can't prove it was him," Sarah cautioned, "but I've already contacted the local police. They'll want to file a report." Madeline's mind was racing. If it was Julian, if he'd been desperate enough to try to break into her house, what had he been planning to do? Take Sophie? Destroy evidence? Silence his daughter before she could remember what he'd done? "I want armed guards posted outside Sophie's room 24/7, she said. "No one gets near her without my explicit approval, and I want the entire property swept for vulnerabilities. Every entrance, every window, every possible point of access. We're going into lockdown." "Madeline," Ethan said quietly, "if Julian is escalating, if he's desperate enough to try something like this, we need to consider moving Sophie somewhere safer, somewhere he can't find her. This is the safest place. My house, my security, my people." But even as she said it, Madeline felt doubt creeping in. Julian had resources. He had connections. If he was truly involved in criminal activity with people like James Donovan, he might have access to resources she couldn't match. She went upstairs to check on Sophie, Ethan following. The nurse looked shaken but calm, and Sophie lay in her bed exactly as they'd left her, unaware of the danger that had crept so close. Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her daughter's golden hair back from her forehead. "I won't let him hurt you," she whispered. "Whatever he did, whatever he's trying to hide, I won't let him touch you." But Sophie's eyes were closed, her face peaceful in sleep, and Madeline wondered if she was wrong to try to bring her daughter back. If maybe Sophie was safer locked away inside herself, protected from the terrible truth that her father valued his freedom more than her life. Protected from the knowledge that the man who was supposed to keep her safe was actually the greatest threat she faced. Ethan touched her shoulder gently. "Come on, let her rest. We need to talk about what happens next." They went back downstairs to the study, where Marcus had laid out the documents they'd taken from storage. The evidence of Julian's crimes spread across expensive mahogany like a cancer diagnosis. Sarah joined them, along with a detective from the local police department who took Madeline's statement about the attempted break-in with professional efficiency. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the detective said, tucking away his notebook. "But Mrs. Carter, I have to be honest with you. Unless we catch someone in the act or get clear footage identifying the intruder, there's not much we can do. We can't arrest someone on suspicion alone." After he left, Madeline sat in her chair feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. She was one of the most powerful women in the country, had built a billion-dollar company from nothing, commanded respect from business leaders and politicians. But she couldn't protect her own daughter from her ex-husband, couldn't use her money or her influence to keep Sophie safe from a man who had every legal right to be in her life. "I'm going to call Detective Morrison in the morning," she said. "Give him these documents. Let the federal investigation do what it needs to do. Julian can't hurt Sophie if he's in federal custody." "That could take months," Marcus warned. "Federal investigations move slowly, and if Julian realizes what's happening, if he lawyers up and starts fighting, it could be a year or more before any charges are filed. Then we need to make sure Sophie is ready to testify before then. We need her to remember, to be able to tell the authorities what she saw." Madeline looked at Ethan. "How fast can you work? How quickly can you bring her back?" Ethan's expression was troubled. "You're talking about forcing her recovery? Pushing her to confront trauma before she's ready? That could do more harm than good. It could break her permanently. And letting Julian run free could get her killed." Madeline's voice rose, cracking with desperation. "You said yourself he might see her as a threat. If he's willing to break into my house, what else is he willing to do?" "I understand your fear. I do. But Madeline, we can't sacrifice Sophie's mental health to build a legal case. She's not evidence. She's a traumatized child who needs gentle, patient care. If we push too hard, we might bring back her body but lose her mind forever." Madeline wanted to scream, to throw something, to rage against the impossible situation she found herself in. But she knew Ethan was right. She'd spent 14 months searching for any way to reach her daughter. She couldn't risk losing Sophie completely now, just because she was afraid of Julian. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "We keep doing what we're doing. We create a safe space for Sophie. We let her communicate at her own pace. We build her trust gradually. And we protect her physically while she heals psychologically." Ethan's voice was firm, certain. "Lila got through to her today. That drawing was more progress than you've seen in over a year. We build on that, slowly, carefully, and we hope it's fast enough." The rest of the night passed in a blur of phone calls and planning. Marcus coordinated with the security team to establish new protocols. Sarah installed additional cameras and motion sensors. Madeline contacted her lawyer to discuss options for restricting Julian's access to Sophie. And Ethan sat with her through it all, a steady presence in the chaos, occasionally making suggestions but mostly just being there, understanding in a way no one else could. By the time the sun rose, Madeline had made her decisions. They would stay in the house, but with military-grade security. Detective Morrison would get the documents, but they'd also keep copies as insurance. Julian's next custody visit would be supervised at a neutral location, with armed security present. And Ethan and Lila would move into the estate for the duration of Sophie's treatment, so they wouldn't have to travel daily and leave Sophie vulnerable. "You don't have to do this," Madeline said to Ethan as dawn light began filtering through the study windows. "You're putting yourself and your daughter in potential danger. If Julian is as desperate as we think, being here makes you targets too." Ethan looked at her with those steady green eyes, and she saw resolve there that matched her own. When my wife was dying, when the cancer was eating her alive and the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do, I made her a promise. I promised her I wouldn't stop trying to save people, that I wouldn't let her death mean I gave up on healing. I broke that promise for 3 years. I hid in my grief and my guilt, and I pushed away everything that mattered. Sophie gave me a reason to remember who I was supposed to be. I'm not walking away now. Something shifted between them in that moment, some recognition of shared purpose and shared pain. Madeline reached across the desk and took his hand, and he squeezed back, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed to be said. The girls woke around 8. Lila came downstairs rubbing sleep from her eyes, still clutching Mr. Hoppy, looking confused about why her father was still there. Sophie's nurse brought her down shortly after, wheeling her into the breakfast room where morning sunlight made everything look deceptively normal and safe. "Good morning," Madeline said, injecting false brightness into her voice. "Lila, how do you feel about an adventure? Your daddy and you are going to stay here with us for a while. You can have your own room, and you and Sophie can spend every day together. Won't that be fun?" Lila looked at her father uncertainly. "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey, we're helping. Remember? We're helping Sophie get better. And Mrs. Carter thinks it would be easier if we stayed here so we don't have to drive back and forth." Ethan knelt beside his daughter. "Is that okay with you? I know this house is really big and different from home, but I'll be here with you the whole time." Lila considered this, then looked at Sophie, sitting silent and still in her wheelchair. "Will Mr. Hoppy be able to help her more if we stay?" "I think he will." "Okay then." Lila walked over to Sophie and carefully retrieved her stuffed rabbit from where she'd left him in Sophie's lap the day before. "Good morning, Sophie. Mr. Hoppy says you had bad dreams last night. He says the bad dreams can't find you when it's morning time. My mommy used to tell me that, and it's true. Bad things get smaller when the sun comes up." Madeline watched her daughter's face, searching for any reaction, any sign that yesterday's breakthrough hadn't been a fluke. Sophie's eyes were fixed on the window, but Madeline could see the tension in her shoulders, could see the way her fingers trembled slightly against the wheelchair's armrest. "Lila," Ethan said gently, "why don't you show Sophie your drawings from yesterday? I bet she'd like to see what you made." Lila brightened and ran to get the sketchpad. While she was gone, Ethan moved closer to Sophie, his voice dropping to that calm, clinical tone. "Sophie, I know you're scared. I know what happened last night probably made you more scared. But I want you to understand something very important. Your mother and I, we're not going to let anyone hurt you. Whatever you saw, whatever you remember, you're safe now. And when you're ready to tell us more, we'll listen. But only when you're ready, okay?" Sophie didn't respond, but Madeline saw her daughter's chest rise and fall a little faster, saw the minute tension in her jaw. She was listening. She was aware. The question was whether she'd be brave enough to emerge again, to risk the terrible vulnerability of communication. Lila returned with the sketchpad, flipping through pages of her childish drawings. "Look, this is Mr. Hoppy on a rocket ship, and this is Mr. Hoppy meeting a dragon, and this is—" She stopped, staring at a page she clearly hadn't drawn. "Daddy, what's this?" Ethan took the pad and Madeline saw his expression change. "Sophie, did you draw more last night?" Sophie's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the sketchpad. Then away. But it was enough. Confirmation that somehow, at some point during the night, she'd reached for those colored pencils again. The new drawing was more detailed than the first. The same wrecked car, but this time there were more elements. A phone in the stick figure's hand, numbers that might have been a license plate, and in the corner, partially hidden behind dark scribbles, a word. Just one word, written in a child's careful letters. Papers. That's what Julian had taken. Papers that were worth more than his daughter's life. Documents that could destroy him, that could send him to prison, that made a little girl lying broken and scared in a demolished car less important than covering his tracks. Madeline felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce and righteous. She thought about calling Julian right now, screaming at him, demanding answers. But Ethan's hand on her arm stopped her, his touch a reminder that this wasn't about her anger. It was about Sophie, about slowly, carefully building the bridge that would bring her daughter back. "That's a very detailed drawing," Ethan said to Sophie, his voice admirably calm. You're very good at remembering things. Very brave to show us what you remember. Thank you for trusting us with this." Lila was looking between the adults, her young face troubled. "Is Sophie showing us something bad? Something that happened?" "Yes, honey, something bad that happened a long time ago, but it's okay to draw bad things sometimes. It helps them get out of your head so they can't hurt you anymore." Ethan pulled his daughter close. "Why don't you draw something happy next to Sophie's picture? Something that shows what happens after the bad thing is over. Can you do that?" Lila took the sketch pad and settled on the floor with her colored pencils. After a moment's thought, she began drawing two stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. "This is you and Sophie after she gets better," she announced. "You're going to the park to feed ducks. My mommy used to take me to feed ducks before she got sick. It was her favorite thing. She said ducks are silly and happy, and they don't worry about anything except finding bread." Something in Madeline's chest cracked at the innocent wisdom of this 8-year-old child who'd lost her mother and somehow found a way to keep living, keep hoping, keep believing that happiness was still possible after tragedy. She looked at Ethan and saw tears in his eyes, too. They spent the morning settling Ethan and Lila into their rooms, a connected suite in the East Wing that gave them privacy while keeping them close to Sophie. Marcus and his team transferred their belongings from the small apartment they'd been living in, and Madeline tried not to notice how few possessions they had. A few boxes of clothes, some of Lila's toys, photo albums that Ethan handled with reverent care, the accumulated life of a man who'd given up everything to hide from his grief. While they unpacked, Madeline met with Detective Morrison in her study, spreading the documents from Julian's files across her desk. Morrison's expression grew darker as he reviewed each page, his pen moving rapidly across his notebook. "This is exactly what we needed," he said finally. "With these documents, we can connect your ex-husband directly to Donovan's money laundering operation. The federal prosecutor has been trying to build this case for 2 years, but they haven't been able to prove who was helping Donovan move the money. These Shell Corporation records, these transaction histories, this is the smoking gun. How long before you can arrest him?" Morrison hesitated. "Mrs. Carter, I need to be straight with you. Building a federal case takes time. We need to verify these documents, get warrants, conduct interviews. It could be months before we have everything we need for an indictment." "I don't have months. Julian tried to break into my house last night. He knows Sophie is starting to remember. Every day we wait is another day my daughter is in danger." "I understand your concern, but rushing this could jeopardize the entire case. If we move too fast, if Julian's attorneys get the evidence suppressed on technicalities, he walks free, and we can't touch him again. You have to trust the process." Madeline wanted to argue, to demand faster action, but she could see the logic in Morrison's words. They had one chance to do this right, one chance to put Julian away and ensure Sophie's safety permanently. She had to be patient, even when every instinct screamed at her to act immediately. "What about Sophie?" she asked. "Will you need her to testify eventually?" "If we can build the case without her testimony, we will. A child witness, especially one with her medical history, can be complicated. Defense attorneys love to discredit children. But if we need her, if her eyewitness account is crucial to establishing the timeline and Julian's actions at the scene, then yes, she'll need to be able to tell us what she saw." After Morrison left, Madeline sat alone in her study staring at the photographs of Sophie's drawings. 2 pictures now. 2 glimpses into the nightmare that had stolen her daughter. But there was more, she knew. More that Sophie remembered. More truth waiting to emerge once she felt safe enough to face it. The days fell into a strange new rhythm. Ethan worked with Sophie every morning, gentle exercises designed to rebuild her neural pathways and strengthen her voluntary muscle control. Lila was always present, chattering away, drawing pictures, playing with Mr. Hoppy, creating a sense of normalcy and childhood innocence that Sophie had been denied for too long. And slowly, incrementally, Sophie began to respond. On the 3rd day, she moved her hand deliberately to touch one of Lila's drawings. On the 5th day, she turned her head to follow Lila's movements across the room. On the 7th day, she picked up a colored pencil without prompting and added a single line to the sketch pad. Just a line, nothing recognizable, but it was voluntary. It was communication. Madeline documented everything, taking photos, keeping detailed notes, building a timeline of progress that felt both miraculous and agonizingly slow. Every small victory was undercut by the knowledge that Julian was still out there, still free, still dangerous. She increased security again, installed panic buttons in every room, hired additional guards. The estate began to feel less like a home and more like a fortress under siege. Julian made his move on the 9th day. His lawyers filed an emergency motion demanding immediate restoration of his custody rights, claiming that Madeline was keeping Sophie from him illegally, that she was subjecting their daughter to unproven treatments from an unlicensed practitioner, that she was alienating Sophie from her father. The motion included sworn statements from psychiatrists Julian had hired, experts who testified that removing a child from a parent was more traumatic than any accident, that Madeline's behavior suggested mental instability and paranoia. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Madeline's attorneys assured her they could fight it, could present evidence of Julian's behavior, but they also warned her that family court judges tended to favor parental rights. Unless she could prove Julian was an immediate danger to Sophie, the judge would likely order at least supervised visitation. "I can't let him near her," Madeline said to Ethan that night after the girls were in bed. They'd fallen into a habit of meeting in the study after dark, sharing coffee and conversation, finding comfort in each other's company. If he gets her alone, even with supervision, he could say something to her, could threaten her, could make her retreat so far inside herself we'll never reach her again. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We show the judge Sophie's progress. We demonstrate that she's finally healing and any disruption could undo everything. Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Madeline, I think it's time to push a little harder with Sophie. I know I said we should go slow, but the reality is we're running out of time. If Julian gets custody, even supervised custody, Sophie needs to be strong enough to tell the judge what happened. She needs to be able to speak." "Can she? In a week?" "You said yourself that forcing it could break her." "I said forcing it could be dangerous. But there's a difference between forcing and encouraging, between pushing and supporting." He leaned forward. "Tomorrow, I want to try something. Art therapy combined with memory work. I'll guide Sophie through the accident using images and drawing, help her externalize the memories so they're not trapped inside anymore. It might trigger a breakthrough. Or it might traumatize her all over again. It's a risk. But Madeline, everything is a risk now. Doing nothing is a risk. Moving too slow is a risk. We're in a situation where there are no safe choices, only choices we can live with." His green eyes held hers. "I won't do this without your permission, but I think Sophie is ready. I think she's been trying to tell us she's ready through these drawings. She wants to come back. She's just terrified of what comes back with her." Madeline thought about her daughter, about the light that had slowly been returning to her eyes over the past week, about the way Sophie tracked Lila's movements now, about the small smiles that flickered across her face when Lila said something particularly silly, about the way her fingers were getting stronger, her movements more deliberate. She was coming back. The question was whether she could come back fast enough. "Do it," Madeline said. "Tomorrow, whatever it takes. I want my daughter back, and I want her back before Julian can get his hands on her again." Morning came too quickly, arriving with gray skies that matched the tension coiled tight in Madeline's chest. She'd barely slept, her mind running through every possible outcome of what Ethan was about to attempt. By 7 a.m., she was already in Sophie's room, helping her daughter dress in comfortable clothes while trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Today's going to be a little different, sweetheart," Madeline said, carefully working Sophie's arms into a soft cotton sweater. "Ethan wants to try something new, something that might help you remember things. It might be hard, but Mommy's going to be right there with you the whole time, and Lila too. We're all going to be there." Sophie's eyes flickered toward her mother's face, held there for a moment longer than usual. Madeline saw something in those blue depths that made her breath catch. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like determination. Like Sophie knew what was coming and was trying to be brave. They gathered in the sunroom an hour later. Ethan had transformed the space overnight, removing most of the furniture and covering the floor with large sheets of paper taped together to create a massive canvas. Art supplies were arranged along the edges. Paints, markers, colored pencils, charcoal. It looked less like a therapy session and more like an art studio designed for children. Lila bounced in wearing paint-splattered overalls, clearly excited about the prospect of making a mess. Daddy said we're going to make the biggest picture ever. He said Sophie can paint whatever she wants, and it's okay if it gets messy. Sophie sat in her wheelchair at the edge of all that blank white paper, her body rigid with tension. Madeline positioned herself nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary, while Marcus stood discreetly in the doorway. They'd agreed he should be present in case Sophie's memories triggered a panic response. Ethan knelt on the paper in front of both girls, his expression calm and confident despite the enormity of what he was attempting. Good morning, Sophie. Good morning, Lila. Thank you both for being here. Today we're going to do something called memory painting. It's a way to take things that are stuck in our heads and put them outside where we can look at them safely. Sophie, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them however you can. You can draw, you can point, you can use colors to show me what you're feeling. There's no wrong way to do this, okay? Sophie's fingers tightened on the wheelchair's armrests, but she didn't retreat into her usual vacant stare. She was present, aware, terrified, but here. Leela, you're going to help Sophie by drawing too. Sometimes it's easier to show hard things when someone else is being brave with you. Ethan handed his daughter a piece of charcoal. I want you both to start by drawing how you feel right now. Not pictures of things, just colors and shapes that match your feelings. Can you do that? Lila immediately began making broad strokes on the paper, swirling purple and blue together in patterns that reminded Madeline of waves. She worked with the unselfconscious abandon of a child who'd never learned to be afraid of self-expression. Sophie watched for a long moment, then slowly, trembling, reached for a black marker. Ethan moved her wheelchair closer to the paper, helping position her so she could reach comfortably. Then they all waited, holding their breath as Sophie's hand hovered over the white surface. The first mark was tentative, a small dark circle. Then another. Then more, faster now, black dots spreading across the paper like a disease. Not random, Madeline realized. They were arranged in a pattern, like stars in a night sky, or like shattered glass catching light. That's beautiful, Sophie, Ethan said quietly. Is that what you see when you think about the accident? Broken pieces? Sophie's hand stilled. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then her head moved. Not much, barely a centimeter. But it moved, up and down, a nod. Her first deliberate communication beyond drawing. Madeline pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Across the room, she saw Marcus's expression soften with something like wonder. Even Lila stopped her own drawing to stare. You're doing so well, Ethan continued, his voice never losing that steady, calm quality. Those broken pieces, they're scary, aren't they? They hurt to remember. But Sophie, I want you to know something important. Broken things can be fixed. And remembering the breaking doesn't make it happen again. You're safe here. The accident is over. It can't hurt you anymore. He picked up a red marker and began drawing on another section of the paper. This is a car. Just a simple car, nothing scary. It's driving down a road on a normal day. Can you show me what happened to this car? Can you help me understand? Sophie stared at Ethan's simple drawing, her whole body vibrating with tension. Madeline could see the war playing out in her daughter's face, could see how desperately Sophie wanted to comply, to communicate, to be brave. But the fear was still so strong, still so overwhelming. It's okay, Ethan said. You don't have to do it alone. Lila, can you draw what you think happened? Even if you weren't there, even if you're just guessing, sometimes it's easier to tell a story when someone else starts it. Lila looked at her father uncertainly, then at Sophie. Okay, I think the car was going really fast and then something bad happened and it crashed into a tree. She picked up a brown marker and drew a crude tree next to Ethan's car. Like that, and then it was all broken. She drew jagged lines across the car, turning it into something recognizable as damaged. It was childish, inaccurate, but it was a start, a template Sophie could correct. And correct her she did. Sophie's hand shot out, grabbing the black marker again, and suddenly she was drawing with fierce intensity. Over Lila's simple crashed car, she created something much more detailed, much more accurate. The crushed front end, the deployed airbags, the spider-webbed windshield, every detail etched with the precision of someone who'd memorized the scene against her will. Yes, Ethan breathed. That's exactly right. You remember it so clearly. And Sophie, that must have been so scary. Being in that car, seeing all that damage. Were you hurt? Sophie's hand moved to her own leg, touched it briefly. Then she drew a small figure in the car, a child-sized figure with red marks on it. You were hurt. You were in pain. Ethan's voice was gentle, but he kept pushing, kept guiding her through the memory. What happened next, after the crash, when the car stopped moving? What did you see? Sophie's marker hovered over the paper. Madeline could see her daughter's chest heaving now, her breathing coming faster. This was the moment. This was the memory that had locked her away. You're safe, Ethan repeated. Whatever you saw, it can't hurt you now. Show me, Sophie. Help me understand. The marker touched paper. Sophie began drawing the stick figure from her earlier pictures, but this time with more detail. An adult man standing beside the wrecked car. On the ground beside him, she drew scattered rectangles. Papers, Madeline realized. Documents spread around the wreckage. And in the man's hand, a phone. Someone was there, Ethan said. Someone who should have been helping you. But they weren't helping, were they? What were they doing instead? Sophie drew more papers. Drew the stick figure, bending down, gathering them. Drew the figure putting them into something, maybe a bag or briefcase. And in the corner of the scene, she drew the small figure again. The child, watching from inside the broken car. You saw someone taking papers, taking them when they should have been taking care of you. Ethan's voice remained steady, but Madeline could hear the anger underneath, carefully controlled. Sophie, this is the hardest question. I know you're scared to answer it, but you need to be brave one more time. Who was it? Who was the person taking the papers? Sophie's whole body was shaking now. The marker fell from her hand and rolled across the paper, leaving a trail of black. She made a sound, the first vocalization Madeline had heard from her in 14 months. It was barely human, more like a wounded animal, a keening whimper of pure distress. Sophie, baby, it's okay, Madeline said, starting to move toward her, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. She needs to finish, he said quietly. Sophie, you're almost there. You're so brave. Just show me one more thing. Who was it? Sophie's hand reached out, trembling violently, and picked up a different marker, blue. She drew something next to the stick figure. At first, Madeline couldn't make sense of it. Then she understood. It was a tie. A blue tie with small dots on it, Julian's tie. The one he'd worn that night. The one the hospital had given back to Madeline with his other personal effects. The one that had been stained with blood and dirt. Your father, Ethan said softly. It was your father who took the papers. Your father who chose documents over calling for help. Your father who let you lie there in pain while he covered his tracks. Sophie's head jerked in a nod, and then the dam broke. The sound that came out of her was inhuman, a scream of anguish and betrayal that had been building for 14 months. She thrashed in her wheelchair, her newly awakened muscles responding to commands, her arms flailing, her body convulsing with the force of finally releasing the terrible truth she'd been carrying alone. Madeline was there in an instant, pulling Sophie from the wheelchair, holding her daughter as she screamed and sobbed and shook. Ethan moved back, giving them space, but his face was grim with satisfaction. They'd done it. They'd broken through the wall that had kept Sophie prisoner. I've got you, Madeline whispered, rocking her daughter back and forth. I've got you, baby. It's okay. It's over. You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. Sophie clung to her mother with newfound strength, her fingers digging into Madeline's shoulders, her face buried in Madeline's neck. And between sobs, between the wordless cries of pain and fear and rage, Madeline heard it. The first words her daughter had spoken in over a year. Daddy left me. Daddy left me there. The words were barely intelligible, slurred and broken, muscles that hadn't formed words in so long, struggling to remember how. But they were words. They were communication. They were proof that Sophie had come back. Lila stood frozen, Mr. Hoppy clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her own face. Ethan knelt beside his daughter, pulling her close. It's okay, honey. Sophie's okay. She's just letting out all the hurt that's been stuck inside. It's good. It's healthy. She's getting better. Marcus had his phone out, Madeline realized. Recording everything. documenting Sophie's breakthrough, her words, her accusation, evidence that could be used in court to protect her from Julian, to ensure he never got near her again. They sat there on the floor covered in paper and art supplies for a long time, Sophie sobbing in Madeline's arms while her body slowly remembered how to feel, how to move, how to exist in the world again. Eventually, the sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shuddering breaths. Sophie's grip on her mother loosened slightly, and she pulled back just enough to look at Madeline's face. "Mama," she whispered, and the word was clearer this time, more controlled. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you." "Oh, baby, no." Madeline cupped Sophie's face in her hands, tears streaming down her own cheeks. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. What happened to you was not your fault. The accident wasn't your fault. Your father's choices weren't your fault. You survived. You found a way to keep yourself safe when no one else would. You're the bravest person I know." Sophie's eyes, truly focused for the first time in so long, searched her mother's face. "He was supposed to help me. He was supposed to call the ambulance, but he was just taking things, just saving papers. I was bleeding and it hurt so much, and he was just taking papers." Each word came out stronger, clearer, as if speaking was a skill Sophie was rapidly relearning. Madeline held her daughter tighter, wishing she could absorb some of the pain, take it on herself so Sophie wouldn't have to carry it anymore. "I know, sweetheart, I know. And what he did was wrong, so wrong. But you don't have to protect him anymore. You don't have to hide what happened. We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth, and we're going to make sure he can never hurt you again." Ethan stood, helping Lila up as well. "Madeline, Sophie needs rest. This kind of breakthrough is exhausting, both physically and emotionally. We should get her somewhere comfortable where she can process everything without being overwhelmed." They helped Sophie stand, her legs weak and unsteady from disuse, but responding to her commands. It took both Madeline and Ethan to support her, but she actually walked on her own feet for the first time since the accident. Each step was shaky, uncertain, but it was movement. It was freedom. They got her to the couch in the living room, settled her with pillows and blankets. Sophie's eyes were already drooping, the emotional and physical exertion catching up with her. Before she fell asleep, she grabbed Madeline's hand. "Don't let him come here," she said, her voice small and frightened. "Please don't let Daddy come here. I don't want to see him. I'm scared of him." "He won't come here," Madeline promised. "I won't let him anywhere near you. You're safe, baby. I promise you're safe." Sophie's eyes closed, and within minutes she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Madeline sat beside her, unwilling to move, unwilling to let go of her daughter's hand. Marcus approached quietly, his phone still recording. "Mrs. Carter, that footage is going to change everything." Sophie's testimony, her explicit statement about what her father did, that's enough to file charges. Enough to get an emergency restraining order that will hold up in any court. "Get it to Detective Morrison immediately," Madeline said. "And to my lawyers, I want that custody hearing canceled. I want Julian arrested. I want him to face what he did." Marcus nodded and stepped away to make calls. Ethan settled into a chair across from Madeline, his face drawn with exhaustion. Lila climbed into his lap, still holding Mr. Hoppy, and buried her face in her father's chest. "That was really scary," Lila whispered. "Is Sophie going to be okay?" "She's going to be better than okay," Ethan assured her. "What you saw was Sophie getting strong again. She's been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and today she finally got to put it down. That's going to help her heal." Madeline looked at Ethan across the space between them, this man who'd risked everything to help her daughter. This janitor who'd been a doctor, who'd seen what everyone else missed, who'd been brave enough to step forward at a charity gala and change the course of their lives. She didn't have words for the gratitude she felt, for the connection that had formed between them over these intense days. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for giving her back to me." Ethan met her eyes, and something passed between them, something that went beyond gratitude or professional respect, something that felt like recognition, like two souls who'd been broken by loss finding unexpected comfort in each other's survival. The rest of the day passed in a strange combination of chaos and calm. Detective Morrison arrived within 2 hours of receiving the footage, his expression grim as he watched Sophie's breakthrough and listened to her words. He sat with Madeline in her study, Marcus present as witness, and explained what would happen next. "This is enough for an arrest warrant," he said. "Between Sophie's testimony, the documents you provided, and the evidence of his behavior at the accident scene, we have multiple charges we can file: obstruction of justice, child endangerment, contributing to the money laundering scheme. The federal prosecutor wants to move fast before Julian realizes how much trouble he's in." "How fast?" Madeline asked. "We'll execute the warrant tomorrow morning. Coordinate with the FBI since this crosses into federal territory. He'll be taken into custody, arraigned, and bail will be set. Given the nature of the charges and his resources, he'll probably make bail, but there will be conditions. No contact with Sophie, surrender of his passport, electronic monitoring. He won't be able to get near her." Madeline felt relief wash over her so intensely it made her dizzy. Tomorrow. By tomorrow, Julian would be in custody, and Sophie would be truly safe. They'd made it. They'd gotten through the worst of it. But Morrison's expression was troubled as he continued. "Mrs. Carter, I need to warn you about something. Julian has connections to some dangerous people through his work with Donovan. We don't know how deep that relationship goes or what resources he might have access to. There's a possibility that when he realizes he's about to be arrested, he might do something desperate." "Like what?" "Like run. Like try to leverage Sophie somehow. Like reach out to people who could help him disappear." Morrison leaned forward. "I'm recommending you maintain maximum security until he's in custody. Keep Sophie inside, keep your guards alert, and if anything unusual happens, you call me immediately." After Morrison left, Madeline briefed her security team on the new threat assessment. Sarah doubled the guard rotation and installed additional sensors on the property perimeter. Marcus began reviewing footage from all cameras, looking for any signs of unusual activity. The house that had felt like a fortress now felt like a bunker, waiting for a siege that might never come. Sophie woke in the late afternoon, groggy and disoriented, but still present, still aware. Madeline helped her sit up, offered her water and crackers, watched her daughter's face for signs of regression or trauma. But Sophie seemed different now. The glazed, vacant quality was gone from her eyes. She looked tired and sad and frightened, but she looked alive. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Madeline asked, brushing hair back from Sophie's forehead. "Weird," Sophie said, her voice still rough from disuse. "Everything feels weird. Like I've been asleep for a really long time and now I'm waking up, but I'm not sure what's real." "Everything's real. You're awake now. You came back to us." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to come back before. I wanted to tell you what happened, but every time I tried to remember, every time I tried to move or talk, I just saw Daddy's face. Saw him looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve instead of his daughter, and I got so scared I couldn't do anything except hide." Madeline gathered Sophie into her arms, holding her carefully, aware of how fragile her daughter still was despite her miraculous recovery. "You don't have to see him again. I'm making sure of that. The police are going to arrest him tomorrow, and after that, he won't be able to come anywhere near you." "What's going to happen to him?" "He's going to face consequences for what he did. To you, to other people. He broke laws, Sophie, important laws, and he hurt you in ways that can never be forgiven. But you don't have to worry about any of that. Your job is just to get better, to remember how to be 11 years old again." Sophie pulled back slightly, looking at her mother with eyes that seemed decades older than they should. "I don't think I can be the same 11-year-old I was before. That Sophie didn't know that people you love can hurt you. That Sophie thought daddies always keep their daughters safe. I know different now." The words broke Madeline's heart because they were true. Her daughter had been forced to learn truths no child should ever have to face. Sophie's innocence had been stolen in that wrecked car on a dark highway, sacrificed to her father's greed and cowardice. Nothing Madeline could do would ever give that back. "No," she agreed quietly. "You can't be exactly the same, but Sophie, you can still be happy. You can still have dreams and friends and a future. What happened to you was terrible, but it doesn't have to define your whole life. You get to choose who you become after this." Sophie considered this, her expression solemn. "Is that what you did? After you and Daddy divorced? You chose who to be?" "Yes. I chose to be strong. I chose to build something that was mine, that no one could take away from me. I chose to be the kind of mother who would fight for her daughter no matter what." Madeline smiled through her tears. and I chose to never, ever give up hope that you'd come back to me. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, mother and daughter, both changed irrevocably by trauma, but still together, still fighting. Eventually, Lila appeared in the doorway, peeking in uncertainly. "Is it okay if I come in?" she asked. "I brought Mr. Hoppy. He wants to make sure Sophie is okay." Sophie looked at the little girl who'd been the catalyst for her recovery, who'd drawn pictures and told stories and shared her most precious possession without asking for anything in return. "I'm okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Thank you for helping me. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be." Lila came in and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the couch. "My daddy says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do things even when you are scared. You were brave today, Sophie. You told the truth even though it was really hard. Your daddy's smart." "I know." Lila grinned, and the sight of her childish pride made both Sophie and Madeline smile. "He's the smartest daddy in the world. Well, maybe not the whole world, but definitely on our street." The girls talked while Madeline watched, feeling something unlock in her chest. This was what she'd been missing for 14 months. The sound of Sophie's voice engaging with another child. The sight of her daughter participating in the world instead of hiding from it. It wasn't perfect. Sophie was still weak, still traumatized, still had months of recovery ahead of her. But she was here. She was present. She was alive in ways that mattered beyond just breathing. Ethan found them there an hour later, bringing dinner on trays since Sophie wasn't strong enough yet to sit at the table. They ate together in the living room, an impromptu family united by trauma and healing. Ethan told funny stories about his medical school days, carefully avoiding anything that might remind Sophie of hospitals or illness. Lila demonstrated her ability to balance a spoon on her nose, which made Sophie laugh, the sound rusty but genuine. And Madeline felt herself relaxing for the first time in what felt like years, allowing herself to believe that maybe, finally, the worst was over. She should have known better. The call came at 11 p.m., just as Madeline was checking on Sophie one last time before bed. Her daughter was already asleep, exhausted from the monumental effort of her breakthrough, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. Madeline was pulling the blankets up when her phone buzzed with Morrison's number. "Mrs. Carter, we have a problem." His voice was tight with tension. "We were planning to execute the warrant first thing in the morning, but we just learned Julian's gone. He's not at his apartment, not at his office, not at any of his usual locations. His car is missing and his phone is off. It looks like he ran." Madeline felt cold dread flood through her body. "When? How long has he been gone?" "His doorman says he left around 8 p.m. with a suitcase and a briefcase. Told the doorman he was going to the airport for a business trip. But we've checked all the area airports and there's no record of him on any flights. So he's still in the area, still close enough to reach my house. That's our assumption. Mrs. Carter, I'm sending additional police units to your location, and I need you to do something for me. I need you to wake Sophie and ask her a question. It might not mean anything, but I need to know. The night of the accident, after Julian took those papers, did he say anything to her? Anything at all?" Madeline's hands were shaking as she gently woke her daughter. Sophie's eyes fluttered open, confused and disoriented. "Mama, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry, baby. I need to ask you something important. It's about the night of the accident. After Daddy took the papers, before the ambulance came, did he say anything to you?" Sophie's face paled. He came back to the car. He leaned in close and he said," her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He said you didn't see anything. You don't remember anything. And if you ever tell anyone what happened here, you'll be sorry. Then he just left me there and made the phone calls." Madeline relayed this to Morrison, her voice shaking with rage. "He threatened her. He threatened an injured child to keep her quiet." That explains the depth of her trauma response. Sophie wasn't just scared, she was actively silenced. "Mrs. Carter, Julian knows the walls are closing in. He knows Sophie can identify him, can testify against him. And based on what she just told you, he's already shown he's willing to threaten her to protect himself. You need to assume he might try to reach her before we can apprehend him." "To do what? She's already told us everything." Morrison's pause was heavy with implication. "Mrs. Carter, when desperate men realize they're facing significant prison time, when they see everything they've built collapsing around them, They sometimes make very bad decisions. I'm not trying to scare you, but I need you to understand the potential danger here. Keep Sophie secure. Keep everyone secure. We're doing everything we can to locate Julian, but until we have him in custody, you should consider yourself under active threat. After hanging up, Madeline stood in Sophie's room feeling like she couldn't breathe. They'd been so close. One more day and Julian would have been arrested, processed, contained. But he'd figured it out somehow, had realized the net was closing and had run. And now he was out there somewhere, desperate and dangerous, and knowing exactly where to find his daughter. She called Marcus, gave him the update, then went to find Ethan. He was in the guest room tucking Lila into bed, singing her some soft lullaby. When he saw Madeline's face, he kissed his daughter's forehead and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed. What happened? Julian ran. He's missing, possibly somewhere nearby, and Morrison thinks he might try to get to Sophie. The words tumbled out fast, desperate. I don't know what to do. I thought we were safe. I thought this was over. Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Madeline let herself collapse against him for just a moment, drawing strength from his solid presence. It's going to be okay, he said quietly. You have an entire security team. Every entrance is monitored. He can't get in. You don't understand. Julian is smart. He's manipulative. He has resources and connections we don't know about. If he wants to get to Sophie badly enough, then we make sure he can't. We lock down completely. No one in or out until the police find him. Ethan pulled back, looking into her eyes. Madeline, Sophie has come too far to lose her now. We've all come too far. Whatever happens, we protect her, together. They spent the rest of the night in a state of high alert, taking shifts watching the security monitors while Marcus coordinated with the police units positioned around the property. Sophie slept through it all, unaware that her father was out there somewhere in the darkness, making calculations about his future that might include doing something unthinkable to ensure his daughter's silence remained permanent. Dawn came gray and cold, and with it came news. Julian's car had been found abandoned at a rest stop 30 miles away. Surveillance footage showed him getting into another vehicle, but the plate was obscured and the car disappeared into morning traffic. He could be anywhere. Could be heading to Canada or Mexico, could be hiding in a hotel planning his next move, or could be circling back toward Westchester and the daughter who'd finally found her voice to speak against him. The courthouse hallways smelled of floor polish and anxiety, a combination that made Madeline's stomach churn as she pushed Sophie's wheelchair through the security checkpoint. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible night when Julian disappeared. 3 weeks of living in lockdown while the FBI tracked his movements across state lines. They'd finally caught him 2 days ago at a motel outside Pittsburgh, trying to arrange passage to Canada through contacts from his money laundering network. He'd resisted arrest, claimed he was innocent of all charges, insisted he only ran because he knew the system was rigged against him. No one believed him, especially not after Sophie's testimony. Today was the custody hearing that Julian's lawyers had somehow managed to push through despite his arrest. His legal team was arguing that Sophie had been coached, that her recovered memories were implanted by Madeline and Ethan, that her entire breakthrough was staged to deny him his parental rights. It was desperate and transparent, but it still had to be addressed in court. The judge needed to hear directly from Sophie about what happened that night, needed to determine whether Julian would ever have access to his daughter again. Sophie sat rigid in her wheelchair, though she could walk now with minimal assistance. Her therapist had suggested the chair for today, a security blanket against the stress of facing her father. She wore a simple blue dress that Madeline had let her pick out herself, and her golden hair was pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 11 years. Her hands gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles were white. "I don't want to see him," Sophie whispered as they approached the courtroom doors. "Mama, please. I don't want to be in the same room with him." "I know, baby, but the judge needs to hear from you. The court needs to understand what really happened." Madeline knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Sophie's cold hands in her own. "You were so brave 3 weeks ago when you told us the truth. You can be brave again today, and this time everyone will hear you. Everyone will know what he did." Ethan appeared from around the corner, Lila's hand clasped in his. He'd been called as an expert witness to explain Sophie's psychological trauma and recovery. Lila was there for moral support, though she'd be kept in the waiting area during the actual testimony. The little girl ran to Sophie immediately, pressing Mr. Hoppy into her hands. "He's very good at making people brave," Lila said seriously. "He helped me be brave when my mommy died, and when I had to talk to the police about what I remembered. He'll help you too." Sophie clutched the worn stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. Detective Morrison joined them moments later, carrying a thick folder of evidence. His face was grim but satisfied. They had everything they needed to prove Julian's crimes: the documents, the phone records, Sophie's medical files, expert testimony about her trauma response. This hearing was just a formality, a legal requirement to officially strip Julian of his parental rights before the criminal trial began. But formality or not, Sophie still had to face the man who'd betrayed her most profoundly. The courtroom was smaller than Madeline expected, more intimate and somehow more intimidating because of it. The judge's bench loomed at the front, flanked by the American flag and the state flag. Julian sat at the defense table with his lawyers, 3 expensive suits arranged like armor against the charges being leveled. When they wheeled Sophie in, Julian turned to look at his daughter, and Madeline saw something flicker across his face. Regret? Fear? Or just calculation about how to play this scene? Sophie made a small sound of distress and pressed herself back in the wheelchair, her whole body vibrating with the effort of not running. Madeline positioned herself between Sophie and Julian, blocking his view, protecting her daughter from even his gaze. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Patricia Hamilton was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law and her particular intolerance for child abuse in any form. Madeline had been relieved when she learned Hamilton would be presiding. If anyone would see through Julian's manipulations, it would be her. "Please be seated," Judge Hamilton said, settling into her chair and surveying the room with sharp eyes. "I've reviewed the case files and the evidence submitted by both parties. This is a custody hearing to determine whether Julian Carter should retain any parental rights regarding his daughter, Sophie Carter, age 11. I understand we have testimony from the child herself, which I'll hear first. I want minimal disruption and no intimidation. Mr. Carter, you will not speak to, gesture toward, or attempt to communicate with your daughter in any way during these proceedings. Is that clear?" Julian's lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence of all charges and believes his daughter has been unduly influenced by her mother's vindictive campaign against him. We request that any testimony be carefully scrutinized for signs of coaching or manipulation. Your objection is noted and overruled. I'm perfectly capable of determining whether a child has been coached, Counselor. Now sit down." Judge Hamilton turned her attention to Sophie, and her expression softened marginally. "Hello, Sophie. I'm Judge Hamilton. I know this is scary, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened the night of the accident. You can take your time answering, and if you need a break at any point, you just let me know. Okay?" Sophie nodded, her voice coming out small and shaky. "Okay. Can you tell me what you remember about that night? Start from the beginning, before the accident happened." Sophie's hands tightened on Mr. Hoppy. Madeline watched her daughter summon courage from some deep reserve, watched her straighten her spine and lift her chin despite the fear. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "We were driving home from Daddy's house. It was late because he'd been working on something in his office and said we had to wait. I was tired and I wanted to go home, but he said it was important. He seemed upset about something, nervous." Sophie paused, gathering herself. "He was driving too fast. I told him to slow down, but he said we were fine. Then there was a deer in the road, and he swerved and we hit a tree." "What happened after the crash?" Judge Hamilton's voice was gentle but firm, keeping Sophie focused. "Everything hurt. I couldn't move my legs, and there was blood on my face, and I was so scared I called for Daddy, and he said he was okay. He got out of the car, and I thought he was going to help me. I thought he was going to call 911. Sophie's voice wavered, but she continued. "But he didn't. He went to the trunk and got his briefcase, and then he started taking papers from the back seat where they'd fallen everywhere. Important papers that he'd been working on at his house." "How long did this go on?" "I don't know exactly. It felt like forever. I kept crying and asking him to help me, asking him to call an ambulance because I hurt so much. But he just kept gathering papers and putting them in his briefcase. Then he made phone calls. I heard him talking to someone about moving money. about needing to secure files. He sounded really worried about the papers, not about me. Julian's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a fabricated narrative. A child who'd just been in a traumatic accident wouldn't remember such specific details about phone conversations. I said, "Sit down, counselor. Sophie, please continue." Sophie looked directly at her father for the first time, and Madeline saw steel in her daughter's gaze that hadn't been there before the accident. After he made his phone calls, he came back to the car. He leaned in really close to me, and his face was scary. Not like my daddy at all. He told me I didn't see anything, I didn't remember anything, and if I ever told anyone what happened, I'd be sorry. Then he called 911. But it had been a long time. More than 10 minutes. I counted. The courtroom was silent. Even Julian's lawyers seemed stunned by the calm, detailed way Sophie delivered her testimony. Judge Hamilton made notes, her expression unreadable. "Sophie, after that night, you stopped speaking and lost the ability to walk. Can you explain what happened?" This was the harder part, and Sophie's voice shook as she answered. "I was so scared of what Daddy said. So scared he'd hurt me if I told, but also I couldn't understand how he could do that, how he could choose papers over helping me. He was supposed to be my daddy. Daddies are supposed to keep you safe. And he just left me there in pain because papers were more important." Tears rolled down Sophie's cheeks now. "So I couldn't talk about it. Every time I tried to remember or tried to tell someone, I'd get so scared I couldn't move or speak. It was like my body just shut down to keep me safe from the truth." "And what changed? What made you able to speak again?" Sophie glanced at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Mr. Cole helped me. And his daughter Lila. They showed me it was safe to remember, that the truth couldn't hurt me worse than hiding from it. They helped me understand that what Daddy did wasn't my fault, and I didn't have to protect him anymore." Judge Hamilton turned her attention to Ethan. "Dr. Cole, I'd like to hear your professional opinion about Sophie's condition and recovery." Ethan stood and approached the witness stand with quiet confidence. Over the next 20 minutes, he explained conversion disorder, the psychological mechanisms that could cause complete paralysis in the absence of physical damage, and the specific trauma response Sophie had exhibited. He described the therapeutic approach he'd used, the gradual breakthrough, the moment when Sophie had finally been able to externalize her memories through art and then through words. "In my professional opinion," Ethan concluded, "Sophie's paralysis was a direct result of the psychological trauma she experienced from her father's betrayal and threats. She witnessed someone she trusted implicitly prioritize his own interests over her well-being in a moment of extreme vulnerability. For a child, that kind of betrayal is catastrophic. It fundamentally breaks their sense of safety in the world. Sophie's mind protected her the only way it knew how, by shutting down completely until she was in an environment secure enough for her to begin processing what happened." Julian's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint Ethan as a disgraced doctor who'd abandoned his practice, questioning his methods and his motives. But Ethan remained calm, answering each question with professional precision, never losing his composure even when the lawyer implied he'd manipulated Sophie for personal gain or to pursue a relationship with Madeline. "My only interest," Ethan said firmly, "was helping a traumatized child recover from unimaginable psychological damage. Everything I did was guided by established therapeutic principles and Sophie's own pace of healing. She was never pushed, never coached, never told what to remember or say. She simply reached a point where she felt safe enough to tell the truth she'd been carrying alone for 14 months. When it was Julian's turn to testify, he presented a carefully crafted narrative of innocence and victimization. Yes, he'd taken the papers from the car, but only because they were sensitive client documents that couldn't be left at an accident scene. Yes, he'd made phone calls before calling 911, but only because he was in shock and not thinking clearly. Yes, he'd spoken to Sophie, but only to tell her everything would be okay, that help was coming. He claimed Sophie had misunderstood his words through the lens of her trauma, that Madeline had poisoned their daughter against him, that this entire case was a vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy him. "I love my daughter," Julian said, looking directly at the judge with tears in his eyes that Madeline knew were calculated for maximum effect. "Everything I've done has been to protect her and provide for her. I made mistakes that night, yes, I was in shock from the accident and I didn't handle things perfectly, but I never threatened her. I never chose papers over her safety, and I certainly never intended for her to suffer the way she has. If she's been traumatized, it's because of the alienation campaign her mother has waged against me, not because of anything I did. It was a masterful performance. Madeline could see some of the court staff looking uncertain, could see Julian's lawyers nodding approvingly. But when she looked at Judge Hamilton, she saw no such uncertainty. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp, analytical, seeing through the performance to the calculating man beneath. Detective Morrison testified next, presenting the evidence of Julian's involvement in the money laundering scheme. The phone record showing he'd called his financial advisor and attorney before emergency services. The timeline that proved Sophie had been left in the wrecked car for at least 12 minutes while Julian secured his documents. He produced the papers Madeline had found in storage, documents that proved Julian had been actively helping James Donovan hide millions in illegal funds. "These are the papers Mr. Carter prioritized over his daughter's welfare," Morrison said, holding up the files. "Papers that could send him to federal prison for 20 years. Papers that were more important to him than calling for help when his 11-year-old daughter was bleeding and terrified in a demolished vehicle." But Julian's lawyer objected repeatedly, claiming the documents were obtained illegally, that they were taken out of context, that they proved nothing about Julian's actions that night. But the judge allowed them into evidence, noting they'd already been reviewed and approved by the federal prosecutor building the criminal case. The hearing stretched through the morning and into the afternoon. Witness after witness testified. The paramedics who'd responded to the scene and noted the suspicious delay in the call, Sophie's doctors who confirmed there was no physical reason for her paralysis, child psychologists who explained the long-term damage of parental betrayal. Each piece of testimony built a picture that was damning in its completeness. Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the courtroom floor, Judge Hamilton called for final statements.